I wasn't planning to talk about this today, but, events. Donald Trump was found guilty on all counts by the New York jury on the so-called hush money trial. According to one script, a vile politician received his just desserts, and the verdict is an objective rendering of justice. According to the other script, a presidential candidate who is the current front-runner for winning the presidency in November is being attempted to be blocked through a blatantly political judicial travesty. Arguably, it's the gulf between those two versions of reality that is America's biggest problem. It is now pretty much unthinkable that either side would accept the result of the election should it be a close outcome. Republicans will believe that their opponents will stoop to any and all tactics to keep them from winning power in any democratic election. It is their firm belief, supported by rather better evidence, it must be said, than their previous firm belief, which was that the 2020 election was stolen, that Democrats had put their rival on trial for offences that would not have been pursued if committed by a Democratic politician. Speaking as someone from the UK, where we do not have politically appointed judges, and the Crown Prosecution Service is likewise independent of governments of whichever colour, this does have a real potent force. President Biden declared that the outcome of the trial showed that nobody is above the law. Well, that's how it's supposed to be. In the UK, it is a basic principle that cases are prosecuted when criminal conduct has occurred, regardless of who the defendant might be, and that justice not only should be done, but should be seen to be done. I think that's how it's supposed to be in the US as well, but that's not what happened in this case. The district attorney who prosecuted Trump had campaigned for election to his position on a promise to do just that, to go after Trump. On what basis wasn't clear at the time, just that something could and should be found to bring him down. Now, that is not justice being fairly applied, regardless of who the defendant is. It is cases being brought solely because of who the defendant is, which is a complete inversion. And it happened in a heavily Democrat-dominated city in front of a judge and jury most likely to favour a guilty verdict. Many suggested that the trial judge had issued ruling after ruling that was hostile to the defence. Certainly, when the judge allowed the jury to convict on felony charges without unanimous agreement as to what were the specific illegal acts, that was taken as legally extraordinary by some. And of course, the crime of which Trump was accused is normally a misdemeanour, punishable by a fine, not a felony that brings in the potential for jail time. And it related to events preceding the 2016 election. 8 years later, they would normally have run out under the statute of limitations. So to get around all of that, various legal hoops were jumped through, novel legal theories brought to bear in order to upgrade the charges to the more serious offences by connecting it to a federal crime relating to the misrepresentations of election campaign funds. This was a potential charge that had already been declined as a potential cause for action by the federal body responsible for regulating what is by rights a federal-level allegation. So it is hardly unreasonable when Republicans look at all of that and argue that for no other person would those legal gymnastics have been performed. And this leaves us with just another step taken towards the undermining of America. I've talked before about the drift towards the conditions compatible with a new civil war, or at least some form of civil conflict. But whether that's too big a leap or not for you, it is certainly another step in the move away from a stable and respected democratic system supported by what is seen to be the impartial rule of law. And as such, it leaves the country with a whole bunch of unhappy scenarios for what happens next. For instance, supposing he's sentenced in July and sent to jail. You then have the front runner for the contest running his campaign from a jail cell. If he loses, his supporters have a much stronger argument that the election has been rigged than they ever did before, because their man was literally targeted and thrown into jail in the manner of banana republics across the world. How would that not count as rigging the election, they will argue? If he wins, then Democrats would be likely to argue more than ever before that this was an illegitimate result, that this man should have been disqualified. A few days ago, before the verdict, there was a Politico story that reported Democrats were having, quote, a full-blown freakout over Biden, a response to his apparently failing campaign and the apparently strong likelihood of defeat. One of the comments quoted in that piece came from Democratic Congressman Richie Torres, who said this: "In a properly functioning democracy," he said, "Donald Trump should have no viable path to the presidency." This is an exciting new definition of democracy that I hadn't come across before. But the point is this: if the conclusion is that Biden's failure, should failure it turn out to be, is a sign that America no longer has a properly functioning democracy, then you see a situation where refusing to accept that outcome comes pre-justified. The problem is that the political actors have drifted to the extremes, so they no longer see basic realities in a way that people within sight of the centre ground might still see them. The Democratic elites think that the voters are inexplicably stupid and blind if they can't see what an incredibly successful job Biden is doing and what an indescribably terrible person Donald Trump is. For them, the narrative that a second Trump presidency would mean the end of democracy is a very prominent one. For example, Paul Krugman, writing in the New York Times this week, stated boldly, "There's a very real possibility that if Trump wins in November, it'll be the last real national election America holds for a very long time." The Republican elites think that everyone will see the world in the same way that they do, although they have at least smashed headfirst into that reality on the issue of abortion, where a number of states that went maximalist on their ideological position there suddenly backtracked sharply when they started to realise that this was not a great vote winner, even amongst their own natural supporters. Still, delusion is remarkably common. The big question is, how will the independent swing voters view all of this? Mostly they've not been paying that close attention, certainly not as much as the politicos have been. A number of them have moved from supporting Biden in 2020 to Trump for 2024 because they're thinking about who they think might restore stability to the economy, might benefit them in their own lives. You can judge for yourself whether they're correct or not. Some of them have perceived that there's a judicial witch hunt against Trump, but how much they thought that through, it's hard to say. Others might be inclined to accept the framing that the mainstream media has been offering them, that the court process is all relatively objective, and that this conviction is vindication of the view that Trump had committed felonies, take from that what you may. Still not clear how much that will actually influence their vote, even if they buy that message. I mean, there are polls suggesting that for a small but substantive enough percentage, because this will be a tight election, that it will be influential. But pollsters also point out that polling against theoretical scenarios is highly unreliable. One indicator is that a bunch of business donors have been sounding out in defense of Trump. Sean Maguire, the founder of Sequoia, announced that as a previous donor to Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign, he had just donated $300,000 to Trump. And he said this: "I believe this is one of the most important elections in my lifetime, and I'm supporting Trump." Billionaire tech investor David Sachs posted, "There is now only one issue in this election, whether the American people will stand for the USA becoming a banana republic." Elon Musk also let his sympathies be known in response to a post by Geiger Capital, which read, "The first felony conviction of a former US president wasn't for the Iraq or Afghanistan wars, illegal CIA coups, drone-striking weddings, or spying on Americans. It was because Trump misclassified a $130,000 payment for a porn star's NDA. Tells you everything you need to know. Elon Musk replied with just one word. Yeah. None of this is to suggest that Trump, or indeed anyone else, should genuinely be above the law. But the fact that this deeply flawed, patently political case was the first one out of the blocks, and the cases came in such a swarm, it rather failed on that principle of justice being seen to be fair. In any case, one thing that's clear is that this has almost certainly degraded American politics for the future, something that many would have thought was barely possible. In 2016, Trump led chants of lock her up against his opponent in that election over allegations that she'd committed what were certainly crimes of a sort, however serious you decided they were. This was described entirely fairly, to be clear, as pretty shocking, norm-breaking behaviour in an election. Now, of course, as soon as the election was over, Trump immediately dismissed all the calls with a wave of a hand. That was before the election, he told his disappointed followers. It was still wrong. The fact that his followers were so disappointed was the absolute red flag of why you don't go that route. But now, the people on Trump's side can point at this prosecution, led by a Democrat who had campaigned on his determination to lock Trump up, remember? And they say, well, now who's the norm breakers? Because Trump threatened it in theatrical fashion. But the Democrats actually, in reality, crossed the line. So now that's going to become normalised. Trying to find ways to prosecute current opponents, or indeed former presidents, will become standard behaviour. All these headline writers saying Trump has become the first ex-president to be charged or to be convicted of a felony. Well, here's a prediction. He won't be the last. Each party will be seeking opportunities, something that could be made to stick, something where there's an excuse to bring a charge in the most partisan district, where juries will be most predisposed to go the way they want. In the immediate wake of the judgment, we got a taste of this. So, for example, the Daily Wire's high-profile commentator Matt Walsh telling his million of subscribers that Trump should make and publish a list of 10 high-ranking Democrat criminals who he will have arrested when he takes office. And of course, he wasn't alone. Sitting presidents may have a much more powerful incentive to seek to prolong their terms, Constitution be damned, in this scenario. If, like Vladimir Putin does today, the assumption is that as soon as they step down, their political opponents will move on them, well, you're certainly stacking the deck in terms of the incentives you're laying in front of them. So, yes, this will become normalised. When it was looking, albeit rather briefly, as though Ron DeSantis was going to emerge as the candidate for 2024, some Democrats already had started saying that he would be, quote, worse than Trump. The activist propensity to demonise the other side has now reached the point where they feel they have permission to catastrophise and the precedent to allow them to use all tactics, no holds barred, to prevent the other side from getting the win. Now, maybe this does not end in civil war, but it's still following the script. And I'm not clear at what point one thing leading to another is now going to diverge from that script. In any case, 2024 is going to be an election unlike any other. Well, at least until 2028 comes along.